Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the Fabian Society tonight, where Yvette Taylor and Malia Motusanga and Rosie Ngakopu from E2 Union are going to discuss with us the union campaign for fair pay agreements, which are proposed legislation that the government has in train, but as we all know in this world, it's important that what is proposed ends up as what is done in its fullness as far as can be worked on. So that's the point of the fair pay campaign. And for us, I think, or speaking for myself, as a former union official, and having gone through two major reconstructions of the law relating to industrial relations and workers' pay, the Green Paper and the White Paper and the Labour Relations Act, I think it was called, and then the dastardly Employment Contracts Act, I know how crucial it is that the legal underpinning of workers' rights and pay are as strong and as sound as they can be. And many people in the past have thought that didn't matter, organisation was all that counted, but the fact of the matter is, without the underpinning of the legal system, everything else becomes extremely hard. And we've seen this in what's happened in our society with pay and conditions steadily driven down, and the latest example of the bus strike with a hedge fund looking to get a capital gain by screwing down the workers, loading the company up with debt and selling it off under a legal framework that says you've got to keep contracting out and contracting out and contracting out. And that is just plain, simple wrong. And it's producing the kind of results that we see in the lives of people all around the country. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Yvette and Malia from the E2. I was with the Engineers Union as was many years ago, so it's a delight to have you here with us and look forward to hearing about your campaign and supporting it as far as we can. So, Yvette, over to you.
Thank you. I have all these microphones. I might just give that one to you. Kia ora koutou katoa. I am Yvette Taylor. I'm a team leader in the campaign team working here in Wellington for E2. And we're really pleased to be here tonight to be able to talk about fair pay agreements, which are going to be one of the best changes at work for many people for a very long time. I really wanted to start, though, by giving Malia the opportunity to speak, because the question of why we need fair pay agreements is really best described by people who are at the forefront of working in low pay, low conditions, and bearing the brunt of an employment system that doesn't work. So I thought we'd start with Malia, and I'll pick up once she's finished.
Thank you, Evie. Hi, everyone. My name is Malia Motusanga, Talofa lava, and greeting to you all. I have a young, active family who I provide for by working 2 different cleaning companies, split shift 6 days a week. It is not easy, but I do this for my family. Most cleaners like me are close to minimum wage, minimum conditions like sick leave, even though COVID has shown that we are essential workers. Last year, my daughter Celiana had an operation of grommets, so I needed to take time off work to look after her. I did not have enough sick leave, which means I have to take leave without pay. That was hard for us as a whānau because we are on a tight budget and every dollar counts. This is a reality of living on a minimum wage. Sometimes you need to make sacrifice. I am a cleaner bargaining team, and we are bargaining in different companies in cleaning industry. Some are better than others. This year, we only got 30 cents increase above the minimum wage. But this bargaining doesn't even cover every cleaning company. We are vulnerable workers on a minimum wage who are also frontline workers. Companies need to respect cleaners as we build the relationships with the clients. And that is why I am campaigning as part of my union, ETU, for fair pay agreement. Fair pay agreement, it takes collective agreement beyond a single employer or multiple employers, like our cleaners, Mecca, to a whole industry. Workers will be able negotiating for one agreement. One set of minimum industry, wide pay, and conditions. Fair pay agreements will mean no more race to the bottom. Some cleaning companies say they want to pay their workers more. However, because the tender of process is so competitive, companies undercut each other to get the contracts. We are cleaners and miss out. Thank you.
Thanks, Malia, and welcome, Rosie. Right into it.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, good evening, everybody. Sorry, I just got back from work, so I'm sorry for being late today, but I'll get on to my speech, eh? All right. So, kia ora ana. My name is Rosalina Ngākopu, but everyone just calls me Rosie. I just want to thank the Fabian crew for allowing Malia and I, to delegates of ETU, to share our perspective on the big question: why do we need fair pay agreements, especially in the security industry and the cleaning industry? I've been in the security industry for almost 3 years. In those 3 years, I've worked for 2 security companies based here in Wellington and have been working on many contracted sites held by both companies. I've noticed for years the security industry could be better protected more by the government, which is why we have been facing the race to the bottom, as Malia had pointed out in her speech. Also, at the cheapest rate with our clients. Clients want cheap contracts in return. They have high expectations for the guards to perform their duties on a daily basis. Pay levels never match the work we do as static guards. 12-hour shifts on a 4-on, 4-off roster sometimes do not work, especially when it comes to covering sites. Some guards may do 15 hours or 20 hours while waiting to be covered. And then that same guard is expected to turn up for their shift a few hours later. And health and safety is the biggest issue for a majority of all our sites, as well as suitable training provided by our companies. I was working on a state housing site in Lower Hutt. Our health and safety was always on high alert with this site, as they were 2 sites on the same street, but about 10 minutes apart. We did not have a place where we could keep an eye on our site. Another guard and I didn't have a car, so to keep warm, we would stay together and walk both sites, and then sit down outside the dairy for the next hour to do another patrol. We were given a key to a house that was not occupied by anyone. It had no power, so we weren't able to heat up any food, no lights, and we mainly used the house for the toilet. It was very hard to fill the positions for the site due to guards not feeling safe. I raised safety issues with our regional manager. I let him know that we needed electricity in the home that was being assigned to us guards so that we can heat up food and make it warm, especially for guards working in the winter. And we are able to charge our phones to do welfare checks. At first, our client didn't do anything, but last I heard, they did end up putting electricity on in their home. They also increased the pay to living wage. So currently, the positions are filled weekly, and our night shift supervisor would always check on guards every couple of hours because of the high risk being on that site. In light of my experience above, which I've just shared with you, it is very important for us to have the fair pay agreement. It will mean better protection for all security guards, no more undercutting. Guards are paid fairly for the amount of work they put in. The 4 on and 4 off roster will be relieved due to everyone wanting to work. Safer health and safety practices and better training opportunities. Security is an awesome job to get into. We have our own challenges. We get thrown into the deep end quite a lot, and it's up to you as a security guard to adapt to any site you work on. Thank you all for your time. Kia ora ana, e kia manuia.
So Malia and Rosie stories are really common. All around the country, this is the same story over and over and over again. Malia and Rosie are union members, and so are thousands of other cleaners and security guards. They are involved in collective bargaining. They're active in the union. They lobby politicians. They lobby the industry for their pay and conditions to be better. But what's clear is that it hasn't worked. And no matter all this effort that they have put in over the years, their pay and conditions continue to be near to rock bottom. So what that shows is that the Employment Relations Act is not currently working to create decent work through collective bargaining for many groups of workers, like cleaners and security guards and home support workers in Year 2. So that's why fair pay agreements are so important to us. Ooh, I had a little thing, oh sorry. As Malia and Rosie already talked about, there's many reasons why this was working. But what I should say is, so, you know, these are Year 2 members, cleaners and security guards. You'll recognise both, well, at least Malia in that photo. And these are, you know, these are the kinds of members that have been active in fighting for this for many, many years. The issue, as has already been mentioned, is that when work is contracted out, it's hard to, you know, the work is contracted out, it's hard to be a union member, and work is insecure and fragmented. The cleaning and security industries are particularly prone to that, particularly fragmented, with lots of different companies competing with each other through competitive tendering processes to win the contracts. This race to the bottom puts pressure on companies to keep wages low, to cut hours, to take shortcuts on health and safety, and to shift all cost of this model onto the lowest paid in the company. The companies are able to do this because, except for minimum standards like the minimum wage, there are no industry standards that all companies that cover all companies in a particular industry. So even though some employers, as Malia said, would like to do better, they know that if they agree to higher labour costs, that means missing out on winning contracts. So this is a core reason why we end up in this situation of having minimum conditions of work for essential workers like Rosie and Malia in the whole industries. The union membership model in the Employment Relations Act makes it hard for workers in fragmented workforces to unionise, and in particular to be able to use industrial power as leverage in collective bargaining under the Employment Relations Act. This is why E2 members are campaigning for fair pay agreements to set standards for decent work in an entire industry and remove workers' pay and conditions from the equation in the contracting out model. And as I said at the start, this will be one of the biggest changes to employment law in decades. So it's really exciting. So in terms of where we're at the moment, fair pay agreements, well, there was a joint working group report produced under the last government, which set out a framework for how fair pay agreements could be implemented. And so these are some of the key parts of that working group report. So negotiated between unions and employers, enforced by individuals, a union or a labour inspector, rights to all workers, whether union members or not, about pay, hours of work, overtime, penal rates, leave conditions, redundancy provisions, rights to skill development and training. So fair pay agreements, despite the title, aren't just about pay. They're about creating decent work. And you can see, sorry. Yes, sorry, I don't mean to flick through. They just keep doing it. So this working group report, as I said, was produced under the last government, and with the election of this government, they have committed to introducing fair pay agreements based on the recommendations of the working group report. So this gives us lots of opportunities in the union movement. You know, as Marlia and Rosie have said, to be able to set minimum standards in wages and key conditions across industries, make it easier to access workers in hard-to-organise industries on paid time, like cleaners and security guards, and to ensure that there is a role for the union, and to really establish a relationship in a dialogue with businesses where workers have a voice at the table. At the moment, we know that's severely lacking in many industries. So this sets out the process for how a fair pay agreement would work. So fair pay agreements will be initiated by unions. They need support from the workforce, so either 1,000 workers or 10% of the industry, or a public interest test for industry or occupation, even if there wasn't that worker support threshold. The process would involve the right for workers who would be covered by the Fair Pay Agreement to attend paid union meetings, and there'd be a renewal process towards the end of an expiry of the Fair Pay Agreement. As you can see there would need to be an institution established to oversee the mechanisms of fair pay agreements, and at the moment, in the interim, distributed across current agencies. In terms of where we're at the moment, as I said, the current government has committed to supporting fair pay agreements based on the recommendations of that working group report. And we're still waiting for this government to make a formal announcement that has gone through Cabinet. Once that happens, there will need to be a process of course, drafting the bill, and of course, it going through its first reading in Parliament, when it will go through the regular select committee process and become law. And after that point, unions will initiate and begin the bargaining process for fair pay agreements. We need your support for this campaign. We know that the government has said that they want to introduce fair pay agreements, but we need to make sure that they keep that promise, and also that the law that they introduce is good fair pay agreement law, that it covers all the things that need to be in there to set those industry standards. So some of those things are ensuring that it does cover all workers in an industry, that it doesn't exclude people in particular parts of the country or particular employers because they try and make excuses for wanting to opt out of it. So those will be crucial parts of the law. We also want to make sure that health and safety is a mandatory term that needs to be negotiated in fair pay agreements. And there's many other things that we need to make sure are in that law so that it's solid and robust and does what it says that it's going to do. So, as I said, at the moment, the government hasn't made an announcement, but we are expecting that will happen soon. And as E2 and E2 members, we're gearing up for a big campaign to build public support around this issue. We expect that there'll be opposition from business and from others on the right, and we need to be able to counter that with the real life experiences and the values of why decent work matters. We also need to, of course, make sure that the government stays on track and isn't swayed by that opposition. So that's our plan for the year, and of course, as we get to the select committee process, making sure that law is as good as possible. We need community support for that, and we would love to have you sign up to be part of our community campaign. There'll be heaps that you can do to support this year and into next year as well to back up the awesome work that leaders like Malia and Rosie are doing to put pressure on the government and build that public support. So that's us, and that's what's happening. But happy to answer any questions and discuss this issue further.
Okay, thanks very much, Yvette. Right, would anybody like to ask or say or? I'll be the roving mic as well, I think.
Thanks. Clearly, there's more to a fair pay agreement than just the rate of pay.
Yes.
And you've mentioned a whole range of other issues to be negotiated as well. And it worries me a little bit that the negotiating burden gets spread is such a wide one, and yet landed on the union to do all the negotiating. And that's particularly the case with health and safety. I mean, if health and safety isn't generically controlled right across the board of the entire labour market, we have something to worry about. And as far as I can tell, the labour inspectors, insofar as we have them, aren't doing a great deal to enforce what we do have. But there surely is scope for legislation to cover things like the health and safety, allowing the unions to negotiate the particular conditions that apply to their industry and their people, without having to handle things that ought to be generic policy things for government.
Yeah, well, of course, our health and safety standards need to be improved across the board. There's no question about that. Where it comes to, and I think where it comes to fair pay agreements, this is, as you sort of alluded to, industry-specific health and safety standards for a particular group, but it certainly doesn't exclude the need for better standards of health and safety across the board.
What's the industry-specific health and safety as distinct from general?
Well, there's particular things around chemicals that they use, processes for cleaning particular areas, at the moment coming into contact with particular people because of the nature of the work. So there's specific things that could be related to that industry, yeah. And one other important part of that is, ensuring that there's worker voice in health and safety as well, and that there's the right for particular groups of workers to be involved in health and safety decisions in their workplace and in their industry.
We talk about industry, but who defines it? Has the Council of Trade Unions set out a list of what we consider to be industries? Because I'm sure that a lot of employers will say, oh, what we do is completely different from X, Y, and Z. How do we define an industry?
Well,
Can the
well,
CTU
like,
help?
I suppose like collective bargaining now, there's coverage clauses in that bargaining, and for fair pay agreements, the coverage should be something that can be worked out between the parties involved.
You're an optimist.
Well, yes, questions? Okay, a couple of, oh, sorry, yes. Hazel, you go.
Yeah, is that all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that on? I was just going to respond to Jeff's point of view about the health and safety, and I want to just use the case study of forestry. In the forestry area, a lot of rural Māori workers are getting killed. They are not unionised at all, very difficult to access, so there's a real public interest aspect to that group of workers. There's a code of practice that was developed many years ago under the national government that did not involve any workers, and we haven't been able to persuade the Labour government or WorkSafe to update the code of practice, which is relevant to forestry. So that's your first point, that any fair pay agreement needs to be supplemented by a consultative process developed with an approved code of practice that sets out in the forestry example how you would fell a tree, what training, what is competence, etc. So you need a code of practice. And then in addition, you'd need your terms and conditions that are specific, hours of work, etc., to be covered in the fair pay agreement. So I think you're right. It's got to be two-tiered.
Is that on? Yes, it is. Linda Hill, I've been involved with pay equity for a long time, and I wanted to ask what you see that is the linkages between the fair pay agreements and pay equity, because the jobs that you've talked about are clearly very gendered jobs where skills aren't recognised. And just in that context, I see on your list was wanting some kind of institutional expertise help unit, and that's what we failed to get with the pay equity changes in the recent pay equity amendment bill. All the women's organisations were pressing for some kind of expertise that women or groups of women or unions could go to on the technicalities. So it's interesting to see it coming up again. Instead of just member deciding things behind closed doors. But yeah, we put in a submission to the working group saying we really, really supported the fair pay agreements because they would be great vehicles for working out some of those equal pay for work of equal value for women's undervalued skills at the same time in your collective negotiations in a way that goes across the whole industry and applies to everybody. So.
Sorry, I wasn't sure what the question.
Say again, sorry?
Sorry? What was the question?
I think it was a linkage.
Oh, the link between. Yeah, well, yes. Well, of course, pay. Of course, pay is one issue, and obviously there's others, which is why a fair pay agreement is so important. And it will be up to unions and to determine what is the best strategy for lifting pay. So. I'm sorry, I don't fully understand.
How are you anticipating a linkage between pay equity and other conditions in the legislation?
John might be able to speak to that.
Okay. We've got a range of expertise.
Yeah, I think the answer, the question was, is there a link between pay equity and fair pay agreements? Is that right? Of course, the first fair pay agreement essentially was the care and support settlement. But because there was no fair pay agreements process, the government had to legislate for it. I think the pay equity process will probably remain separate, but it is a legal mechanism once you've got established to extend pay equity across all occupations or sectors. At the moment, for instance, if you are in farmers and you win a pay equity case, in fact, you've got one with farmers, but there's no legal mechanism to translate that across all shop assistants. And fair pay agreements does give you a vehicle, a legal vehicle to do that. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's I think you establish the fair pay agreements first, because in the private sector, there's no mechanism to get anything really. It's all voluntary. Fair pay agreements is compulsory arbitration, and once there's an arbitration judgment, it binds everyone, whether you're a current employer or an employer yet to set up. And as far as Pat's issue about the coverage is defined by the union. And so whatever the union initiates is what you end up with.
Yes.
Hi, Jan Rivers. Hey, I'm kind of interested to hear that the bill will come out fully formed, and that neither A2 or the Council of Trade Unions is involved in the prior deliberations with the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. It would seem to me that they're losing out on a lot of potential expertise about what should be contained in such a bill. Is that right? I mean, are you not there at the table? Are you not looking at the exposure drafts?
Yeah, of course the CTU and unions will be involved in that. Yeah, sorry, I just didn't elaborate on that
Thank
point.
you.
Sorry.
I would think they've been involved for several years, would be my expectation. Yeah, certainly that was the case with the Labour Relations Bill. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, hi, Kevin Burrows. Is there any provision in the bill regarding union membership and the recruitment of union membership? Because if 10% initiates, you require 10%, that leaves another 90% that are non-unionised. And it doesn't put you in a very good bargaining position. So there needs to be a mechanism around union membership, making it easier for membership for unions to recruit.
Yeah, so an important part in the fair pay agreement process is, will be the rights of unions to meet with workers under the coverage of a proposed fair pay agreement. So that would involve the rights for those workers to meet, whether they're union members or not, to discuss claims for the fair pay agreement. And then at the end, of course, a fair pay agreement would need to be ratified by the workers in the sector, again, whether they were union or not. So both those processes are a really important opportunity to unionise those workers, and that's something that we've demonstrated previously in other union work, where we've had big opportunities to unionise people through these processes. So certainly, of course, we need a much better law around union membership, and that's something that E2 absolutely supports. Of course, as part of a fair pay agreement, you could claim for a bargaining fee, which would support unionisation in those industries where there was a fair pay agreement in place as well.
Hi, I just want to know the ability to catch independent contractors with the FPAs. I know cleaners are a lot of the time, but do they have the scope, Uber drivers and that kind of stuff, or would that more come under the public interest?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something that we feel really strongly about, and it's something that needs to be addressed because, particularly in commercial cleaning, there's a number of, franchise operators which are effectively small business owners that do the cleaning work themselves. We need to work out a way for those groups of workers to be covered by these fair pay agreements. I don't know whether that's going to be something that's straightforward, but certainly something that, that we think needs to be addressed, because otherwise, it will support that kind of model of work, which we know is not good for terms and conditions.
I'd just like to ask, who's at the other side of the table in the negotiation of a fair pay agreement? And it's just maybe my, and the reason I'm asking is this, because I think what happened in previous legislation changes that were an attack on unions effectively, what the other side discovered was the quickest way to destabilize the collective approach was to destabilize the employer collective. It was much quicker to do that than it was to destabilize the union collective. Who will be sitting on the other side of the table once coverage is established and negotiations commence to represent the other party?
Well, there will need to be employer bodies for the particular industry that a fair pay agreement is being negotiated for. And so that's an important part of the legislation and the work that needs to be done before that legislation comes into effect, so that there's clear structures for employer representation, and that both unions and those employer bodies are supported to be an effective group to lead the bargaining.
Yes, sorry, Jeff.
Just following up on that, here's an economist's question about the way the market works in general. We've moved into this regime of contracting, which is sort of putting out of work, precisely as a way of breaking worker power and driving wages and conditions down. The whole point of the contracting framework is indeed to drive down labour's share of the cake, if you like. Now, if fair pay agreements are part of a mechanism that improves the position of workers, at some point, the contracting model itself might become not viable. And at that point, companies that need their office blocks cleaned could find it more efficient to hire their own cleaners again, as once used to happen, and cut out the middleman. I mean, the function of the middleman is basically to keep the workers down. And if the workers are no longer down, the middleman becomes increasingly irrelevant, and that means the party on the other side of the bargaining table may very well, 10 years from now, if we're lucky, be the actual consumer of the service rather than the provider of the contracted service. I take it that you can contemplate that sort of structural shift in the way the market works.
Yeah, that could be an effect of the fair pay agreements. As you say, so many of those companies exist to be able to try and undercut each other, and clients use that to their advantage to get services at the lowest cost. So, this will take labour costs out of the equation when it comes to the tendering process, and companies will have to compete on things like quality of service, and other factors. So yeah, that could very well be the effect if they can't compete on other things.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, because we were talking about health and safety, say once if you negotiate the pay, and that seems to be actually the most straightforward part, and when we say health and safety, I thought there should be some basic requirement like health and safety document, how you draw, that will be by, I don't know, by union or by employers, because it seems to be if they don't really follow the work safe, those guidelines, if anything happen, if a lot of accidents happen, like they are quite, like 10 most happen hazards at work, and actually cleaners work, I could tell they fall into like 3 of the 10 category quite easily. But what I'm saying is that if they happen, a lot of a lot of accidents. Basically, ACC is going to charge more for employer, and it's not really in their best interest to really ignore this. So I don't quite understand, like, who are you going to negotiate this with? Like who is on another side of the table? And also the casual contract, I thought when we got rid of the 0-hour contract, when we say casual work, there is entitled, employees are entitled to the leave and also certain things, because my son just going to start one. So I'm not sure why the cleaners need to be specifically sort of out of the casual contract to negotiate different kind of contract. I mean, for the leave without, like she mentioned, like leave without pay, you know, no entitlement to the holiday or something like that. Sorry, I'm not sure whether my English is good enough to make it clear.
In terms of the health and safety, you know, unions would have many ideas and be able to put forward claims about what health and safety they would want to be part of a fair pay agreement, and it would be a binding agreement that would require those employers in the industry under that coverage to, you know, to follow that agreement once it was in place. I'm not completely sure about your question about casual workers, other than to say that a fair pay agreement, we would expect all workers who fitted in the industry to be covered, whether they were in a casual arrangement or not. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I got your question there.
So you're talking about a standardised rate of pay and conditions across a whole defined industry.
Yeah,
is what the objective
right.
is, yes. So it would apply to everybody, whether they're in a union or not, once those are established. Yeah, okay, all good. Right.
It's not really a question. It's Laura Thomas from the nurses. Just to say thanks for coming tonight, because it's really an important issue, I think, for lots of workers, clearly very important for security and cleaning. But, you know, ultimately, it's, at the moment, the minimum is the minimum wage, and employers have to do that. So it's about negotiating a minimum across an industry, and I can really see some benefits, you know, of fair pay agreements in lots of areas. So, yeah, just great that you're here talking to us all about it. Thanks.
And I've got 2 microphones. Would anyone like to use one before we say thank you? Well, I'd like first of all to say thank you to Malia and Rosie and Yvette for coming along to introduce us to the topic of fair pay agreements. And I have to say, for me, you know, if there's one thing that we, as in the Fabian Society, could do to help promote, this has to be it. Because we have seen over, well, at least I've seen over my lifetime, a massive onslaught on pay and conditions for working people in New Zealand. And this is at least a hopeful sign with a government committed to the process. But what it's going to need, as well as that, is the support of everyone else. And this, because it's going to be, it is a political issue, it always was a political issue, it is going to get even more so, in my opinion. And Yvette, as a good organiser, has brought along tonight a sign-up sheet. So we'll put that out in the foyer. And people I'd strongly urge everyone who wishes to sign up, so they've got at least your contact details and can help in the ongoing campaign, which is going to... Oh, I thought you were talking about next year.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to know, but I think there'll be quite a period for the bill to be drafted. There's quite a lot, as you can imagine, that will need to go into setting up a whole framework. So you're talking about possibly introduction later this year? Yeah, introduction later this year.
So then there'll be, yes.
Can I make a suggestion
Okay. All right, we'll make sure that when it goes up on our website, we'll put the link up, but that's a good idea too, yeah, okay. All right, so once again, thanks Malia, Rosie and Yvette. You've done a splendid job. We're right behind you, so go for it in your campaign, and thanks very, very much everyone.